wasn't anyone else's money, it wasn't anyone else's time, but it was mine. So I was working for Energy Northwest. If you know that, it's one of the reasons you have power. It's a nuclear power plant up in Tri-Cities. Operates, kicks out 1,200 megawatts. I was doing actually permitting for new small modular reactors. So this is like high level science that I didn't understand. But I was the permittee, the lawyer for that, doing this stuff that I thought, man, this is gonna be a great career. I'm gonna be out here, I'm gonna see these reactors operate in the Tri-Cities, and one day someone's gonna flip the breaker and I'll be part of that. But as COVID continued to erode my children's rights, and this is the sad part of the equation, it really took my kids' rights to get me engaged and involved. I was frustrated. I sit on the Pasco City Council, and I brought a reopen ordinance because we had some businesses that were grassed. We had a lot of restaurants, bars, where Liquor Cannabis Board would come in and say, hey, your patrons aren't wearing masks, so we're going to fine you $1,000. We're going to take your liquor license. And these people came to me as a councilman and said, what can you do for me? And I said, well, I'm one of 7. I know it's not going to go anywhere, so I wrote a reopen ordinance, got it to the floor, and boom, I just got slammed. I had one lady who's now our mayor. She said, Councilman Serrano, you're an attorney. Why don't you do something not in chambers? And I thought, well, that's a really weak statement. You were elected to represent people, not just people that think like you, but people who are suffering. We work for the government. The overwhelming majority of the 7 of us at the time, we had a couple independent business owners, but 5 of the 7 had government-related jobs. And so we were all safe, right? We weren't facing this impending loss of job. That these people who had worked the American dream, some of these people that own these restaurants either grew up in them or they literally started as a server and somehow worked their way up and were able to take them over and buy out the prior owners. That is the American dream. You can start wherever you are today and you can get to here. And when I saw that dream, not so much for myself, but for these people that were asking me with just these desperate, despondent looks, when I saw my kids struggling at school because it was on again, off again, then it was canceled for a year, the decision was we're going to do something. So Rob and I said, all right, what are we going to do? So we started working with these businesses. We took care of that. And then there was an opportunity to assist with the recall of Jay Inslee in last spring. And so I was fortunate to participate very heavily in that first iteration. I wrote half of the charges, and I argued the case in the Superior Court of Olympia, or Thurston County. And when we got through that, I realized that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to take my time. It was a narrow, single-focused goal of just, let's go after Jay Inslee. Well, yeah, I want to go after Jay Inslee, but let's not just focus on the recall. Let's focus on how he's damaging people. Let's focus on protecting people's employments. And so we started doing that. I had school teachers reach out, and we developed a creed-based because I had a lot of people say, hey, I don't want to get vaccinated, or I don't want to get the shot, but I don't have a particular religion I ascribe to. What do? I said, well, the great thing about Washington's law against discrimination, which is similar to the Civil Rights, the United States Civil Rights Act, is it's more expansive. It protects your beliefs. It doesn't have to be tied to a religion. It protects your creed. Like, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to you? Let's find it. You believe that you might not have a God that you ascribe to, but you believe that the government shouldn't tell you to put something in your body for your job? Yeah. Is that your creed? Have you lived by that? Is that how you make your decisions? Yeah, I've always believed that. Well, there's your creed. So we started writing exemptions for folks. And when we had at the time I had 2 directors in Snohomish County, and we were circulating these exemptions, and we saw some success with that. And then we decided that the first case we would take was a single plaintiff case for an individual working in the corrections facility in Franklin County, because I knew if I drew the right judge, he would actually stand up for what was right. Now it was like a 1 of 7 shot, and so we got that judge. And I can tell you this, I have never seen any attorney yell at a judge. Now, of course, we're in Zoom world, so it really doesn't take the brass, we'll say, to stand up and yell at a judge. You know, if I'm yelling at someone here online, I can yell at anyone on the camera. Yelling at you people right here in front of me is a little bit more of a risk. And this guy starts to tee off to the judge and he says, Mr. Jones, you better be quiet right now because I was elected to use my independent intellect to decide cases like this, and whether you like it or not, that's what I'm doing. And so we had this judge stand up for us, and I learned a lot about the way the state operates. I was talking to some of you earlier. When it's our team, it's usually our team against 3, 4, 5, 6 attorneys and 2 to 3 staffers. Rarely, and I'm seeing on these administrative cases, and I think Karen can attest to this, it's a smaller ratio, at least 1 attorney, 2 attorneys, and then 1 or 2 staffers. But when I'm suing Jay Inslee about what he's doing through his executive powers, it's a team of lawyers. And that's just what pleads, right? That's just what signs off. We don't know what the real reach they have, that army behind them, because here's the grossest part of this equation. This is your and my tax dollars fighting against me, fighting for our rights. I mean, think of that equation. It's like I send money up there to oppress me, and then I fight them, and they spend that money to oppress me again. It's like, what the, you know, I'll beat myself here. You know, what the heck? Really, I'm paying you to fight me, to fight for me, and everyone else. This is the most disgusting transaction in my life. You know, it's one thing to get cheated. It's one thing to get cheated and go back to it. That's fine. But when it's your government flat out abusing you with your money, I mean, there are days where I'd say, screw it, let's all just not pay our taxes, and then they can come for us, right? Hey, we're armed. Cough, cough. So that's kind of the impetus of why we started Silent Majority Foundation. Medical freedom became a thing when Jen actually reached out to me and she's like, hey, there's this group called MAFA, Make Americans Free Again. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sounds good. What is it? Yeah. And so we start talking. And she introduced me to Pam Popper. And actually this past summer, my family and I road trip, because we're not willing to fly. We road tripped across country. Happened that there was a MAFA meeting at Pam's place in Ohio when on a Tuesday that we were crossing, or a Wednesday, that we were crossing state lines, and we're like, hey, you know, it's only a 45-minute swing or 2-hour swing. It's been 35 hours in the car, who cares? So let's just tack it on. So we got to meet Pam. That was phenomenal. I mean, she's been a treat to work with. Pam is so invested into procuring medical freedom. I mean, she's literally investing in, as Jen said, organizations, MAFA, throughout the country. That's her dream, is to fund these things to the level of having MAFA or MAFA-oriented organizations that stand for individual rights in every state of the nation. And we're seeing it. I think she's up to, and don't quote me on this, but we've got about 24 attorneys that represent, I think, 11 or 12 states. You know, when I'm on there, people in Florida, Texas, a guy in Boston, a guy in Pennsylvania. I think we're in Minnesota and Wisconsin now. I mean, so this kind of Pam's idea, because she had a licensure issue 2 decades ago, and she's carried the burden of that. Now she sees an engaged community, the public, whose doctors are being told you can't say this, or you'll lose your license. Oh, you can't cure people, or you can't treat people, or you'll lose your license. And that, to me, has been the biggest intrigue of all this. You know, I never thought there'd be a day. Yeah, there are times where I go to a doctor and I don't, is that really the best advice you're giving me? Or is that, you know, and that's questionable. So guess what? I go to a new doctor. But the way they're trying to regulate medicine today, it's in a way that, I mean, you look at this state through the Washington Medical Commission. It adopted the Federation of State Medical Boards. So let's stop here. This is where it gets interactive. Who knows what the Federation of State Medical Boards is? Anyone? The other attorney that worked with me raised her hand. Federation of State Medical Boards is a non-profit organization organization that runs about a $50 to $60 million annual budget. Would you like to know where their money comes from? You ever hear of Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna? We can keep going down the list. This is a federation, a group of state medical boards who the state of Washington Medical Commission, the reason Scott Miller had trouble, and a doctor that I'm representing in the Valley, and I won't say which one because we don't need to put them out there at more risk, but these other doctors that we're representing and other ones that are not represented that we're aware of, or we're kind of becoming aware of, is because a group that's got a $60 million budget from pharmaceutical and other medical industries is deciding what's best to go into your body. And then they're pressing it to the states. The Washington Medical Commission has a representative that's a delegate to the FSMB, the Federation of State Medical Boards. So we have someone out of our Thurston office, well, not ours, but the State Medical Commission's commissioners is a representative that goes out there, gets the training, or whatever indoctrination, let's call it what it is, and then they bring it back, or they write something that's extremely far out there, because we know the tendency of Thurston County is to go as far as it can go, and then finally get ratcheted back to how much you and I can suffer. We cannot suffer anymore, okay? We cannot put up with it. The time to call halt was over 2 years ago. And if we've not called halt today, we have to call them out on that. So with this, the Federation of State Medical Boards gets the statement that you can't speak against COVID-19 treatments, meaning the approved by the FDA, NIH, which has never been the case. The practice of medicine has been entirely rearranged from this pandemic, the way things are brought down. And so the Medical Commission adopts the statement, no COVID disinformation or misinformation, which is total BS in and of itself. It's not defined. And there's a whole element of the practice of medicine regulating your speech. Yeah. And that's something that Karen and I, Klaus, our other attorney, work desperately to fight, because it's not just that your doctor should be able to treat you with his or her intellect, but he or she should be able to say what that individual thinks. Hey, look, I've been your treating physician for 2 decades. This is not good for you. I know your body almost as well as you do, right? And that's why you go to these people, for their advice, for their intellect, not because they're going to take a script and say this is allowable and this is not allowable. I can say this, I can treat with this, but I can't do this and that. That's not the practice of medicine. And so that's why we got involved through Jen with Scott's case. We met him, Scott and Shelly and I met probably a year or so ago down at one of the events that I think Jen was hosting at the Black Pearl. And it was just one of those where, okay, that guy gets it. That guy gets it. There's a time to be selfish and a time to be selfless, and a time that selflessness drives you into a crazy stir where you're kind of probably should be in a bit of a padded wall. And Scott and I have been in those moments together, literally on calls with hospitals at 2, 3 in the morning, because this guy wouldn't stop. And I said, well, hey, I got the same conviction to protect people. I probably shouldn't either. And so with Silent Majority Foundation, we've got this element of the math-oriented cases, but we're now actively litigating Senate Bill 5078. If you're aware of that, you probably like guns. If you're aware of that, you probably have heard of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Washington Constitution, Article 1, Section 24, which protect your right to bear arms. And as the state of Washington legislature believes, that's cool as long as it's not certain types of guns or has the ability of 10 rounds, well 11 rounds we'll call it because it's more than 10 plus rounds. So somehow if I've got a pistol, it's safe at 10 or 9 or 8 or 7, keep going down, but at 11 it's deadly. I don't understand It's probably Jay Inslee's Science and Data. He's probably told us that. Somehow 11-round magazines kill everyone. I can assure you that their pleadings indicate that. Yeah, the state talked about the safety mechanisms of chopping it at 10 rounds. I still don't get it. I mean, it's hard. I got to tell you this. It is really hard to suspend reality to plead a case against these people. It's like, I just want to write F no. This is stupid. Thanks, Your Honor. Have a good night. Unfortunately, there's a threshold of pleading that doesn't work. And so, while people like Karen and I are having to get extremely creative on how we work these issues and put in the research to protect our constitutional rights that have been done for 250 years almost, the state just walks up, hands something in. Back to that single plaintiff in Franklin County where the guy was yelling at the judge. What I learned from that case, not only was I outnumbered, literally the next day, where did they go? Thurston County. Why? They went direct appeal to the Supreme Court. Think about this. What did they do? They dialed a friend. Who was that friend? The 9 justices of the state Supreme Court. Hey, we got a problem here. We got a judge that's going rogue that interprets the law in a reasonable way. What are you guys going to do? First thing they do, they send it to a commissioner. He's this gatekeeper that's hired, an ex-lawyer that's hired by the Supreme Court to determine whether or not cases go in and out. We are specifically stating that Mr. Johnson, our plaintiff, should not have a condition of employment that he's vaccinated. It is clearly that simple. No vaccine requirement. We didn't address ivermectin. We didn't address HCQ. We didn't address alternative treatments. It was just not a condition of employment, not bargained for, breach of a contract, and all these other very base level laws. It wasn't a science-based pleading, because I knew if I did that at that time, this was pre-Sound Majority Foundation. I was literally alone, working a full-time job with my wife and kids, and staying up all night, pulling a Scott Miller, minus the coffee beans. I was staying up all night, and then I'd go into work, and I knew eventually I'd get fired or I'd have to quit, which I didn't get fired. I did quit. I'll be clear about that. And they took it to the Supreme Court. This commissioner says in a footnote, and the judge, because I live in Franklin County, I bumped into him getting a burrito the other day. Said, you know what, I got that opinion. I got that commissioner's opinion. It's still on my desk, and it still pisses me off, and I hope to see you again, Mr. Serrano. And it's like, thank you, Judge. I know exactly what that signal is. Thank you, Your Honor. You've given me the hope that I have, that I got someone that's going to listen to me. Not just, and I don't want to say this in a way that sounds bad, not just you folks, but someone who can make that decision that wears that black robe. Because we all agree, that's why we're here tonight. But we need people wearing those black robes to care and to understand. And to understand that they have an oath to the Constitution and the laws of the United States and Washington. So they go to the Supreme Court, the commissioner, Michael Johnson, I believe is his name, he puts in a footnote. And there is no benefit to treatment with horse dewormer, ivermectin. I know. This is so arrogant. I know because I grew up on a horse farm. Are you? Okay. This is one where I really want to say, Lily, plug your ears. Are you kidding me? Seriously. You're good. Seriously. He's going to use his experience growing up on a horse farm to determine something, one that A, is way outside of the pleadings. And so this is one of my biggest regrets in this. I had 90%, I was actually writing a motion to force this guy to recuse himself. Even though he only had one role and it was done, I was still pissed off enough that I wanted the record to be there. And I got 90% of the way, and unfortunately either work got busy or there was another case to bring on, and I missed it literally that weekend. I was gonna work on it, but the time lapsed on a Friday. I just wanted to say, you know what, I should have just said, F you, Judge. Like I told you, that's the pleading I want to bring one day. F you, you're wrong. I know you're not going to ever change your mind, and that's fine. But I want this to be on record. Because, at one point, you and I will be judged for what we do here on this earth, and I sure as hell want a record of what Jay Inslee did.
Yeah.
Damn right I'm going to pursue that guy. You know? I will not quit. I will not quit because I want there to be a record of what that guy did.
Yeah.
And all the other ones. That's why we sued Chris Reichdahl about your kids being forced to wear masks. That's why we've challenged the Department of Labor and Industries. We've been working with our folks from Informed Choice on the Office of Financial Management, going so far outside of their wheelhouse. Absolutely, brother, we got you. These agencies need to be pulled back. And it's twofold. One, the best would be to get a legislature that's not lazy. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, because there are some phenomenal legislators. But when they write the laws, they say this agency shall have 13 discrete powers. 1 through 12 are very clearly articulated. 13 is whatever else it needs to do what it's been told to do. Well, I can tell you this. If I tell my kids to go to the kitchen because that's where the food is, and you can have these 12 things, but the 13th is if you don't want them, like there are plenty of cookies, there's cake, whatever you want, and the high C, all sorts of sugar, right? Where do you think my kid's gonna go? They're gonna go to fruits and they're gonna go to the fruits and veggies? They're gonna go to the healthy things? No. They're gonna take the cookies and the cakes. And that's what the legislature's granted to these agencies. They have the ability to go take cookies and cakes for lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and they don't care about diabetes. They don't care about getting overweight. They don't care because they want to bloat. The bigger, the stronger, the better, the more oppressive. Do you see a pattern here between our elected and our unelected officials? Do they care about us? And I'm not saying that for all of them. I want to be very clear. Like I said, I sit on a city council. I am a sitting councilman. There are elected officials that care about us, that fight for us. I'm not talking about that group. I'm talking about the ones that are currently fully in power. Whether it's Lori Jenkins, the Speaker of the House, we also sued to get our legislature back in office. Really, you're going to tell me that when Jim Walsh walks in and he's unvaxxed, or when Bob McCaslin out of Spokane, who's vaccinated but he doesn't want to show his papers, you're going to tell him he can't legislate? Hell no. Jay Inslee in Thurston County didn't elect Jim Walsh or Bob McCaslin, unless, they probably did. Or their dead relatives did. I don't know. I guess those are the Republicans, so that, we're nonpartisan. Wink. So you're telling me that these people can't legislate because they're unvaccinated, or they are, but your job's not to make sure they're vaccinated, to get on the House floor? It was ridiculous. That's why we lodged that lawsuit, and shortly thereafter, they were in session again. I see a hand in that.
What happened to HIPAA? And did you show any evidence that ivermectin is also for human consumption and it is used as a repurposed drug for a number of other illnesses?
Yeah, so the question was, what happened to HIPAA? What happened to, did you show evidence? I guess to the second question of ivermectin, I've addressed that issue in the appropriate setting, if that makes sense. Like with the case of Mr. Johnson, our single plaintiff, I squarely kept that on vaccines, right? It would have been, what's crazy about this equation, and try to follow me here, is had I, at that point in the pleadings, then introduced evidence-based pleadings for ivermectin, they would have said it's outside of the purpose of the pleading. But because this jerk gets to have the commissioner title, he can do what he wants, right? And so, again, in that case I didn't, but we've brought it in. We obviously talked a lot about it on Scott's behalf, the importance of having these treatments and the fact that they're not prohibited. I mean, we went through the NIH charts and every iteration and talked about those. I'm trying to think. I know with some of our rulemaking approaches, we've addressed the science behind it, as well as with some of our other litigation. I'd have to really pull my mind on which one. I think specifically when we challenged Chris Reichdahl's mask mandate, that was twofold. One, that there was no real scientific base on that. So again, we didn't address ivermectin per se because that's not related to the masks, in the sense that, you know, it wasn't the shot in the mask, it was just the masks and what it was doing to kids. We also addressed the whole reason we brought that lawsuit was because he enforced Jay Inslee's proclamation. It's like, what the hell, man? This is seriously a banana republic. There's no reason the state superintendent has any authority to do anything that Jay Inslee cannot enforce. Let's be clear, Jay Inslee cannot enforce his proclamations. He doesn't have that authority, he lacks that authority. Okay, now what he can do is issue a proclamation and state that it's subject to X, Y, and Z penalty. That's what he does. As the executive, he executes the law, he writes it, and when it's not legislated and granted, and we could discuss whether or not that's granted to him, but let's assume, for just to not go so far off, let's assume he had that authority. Once he signs it in a law and it says this is the penalty, that's appropriate. Now it's for your local sheriffs or some other enforcement agency to enforce the law. And that's not Chris Reichdahl. That's why we brought the kids' mask mandate. That, and kids shouldn't be in masks. So that's that. And then again, we've addressed the ivermectin. And you had a second question now. I think I've gone far. Oh, the HIPAA component. Yeah, we've addressed the fact that you're now forcing people to provide private medical information. That somehow has gone on deaf ears. It's not ultimately successful. Part of it has to do with who holds the HIPAA privacy. It also has to do with the distinction between whether it's requested or mandated. And obviously, in many of these cases, they're requiring it, right? To me, that's just, we've not gone hard on that litigation front, but we have challenged it, at least softly. What other questions do you have? Scott?
What's the threat to your license?
What's the threat to my license?
You're going after Inslee and Reichdahl. Does that put you in harm?
Yeah, no, there's no question. Fortunately, I have intentionally retained my license in California and Florida. Sure as hell, if I get run out of this state, I'm not even gonna try in California. I do keep my license in Florida, but there's no question that my license is at risk. There could be a day where the State Bar Association comes after it, and I'm expecting that at some point. I think, it'd be really interesting to see them come after an attorney's ability to speak. And this isn't to suggest that a doctor's ability or any other profession should be, inferior, right? It's all equal footing. And I think that's the one thing that if I'm this crazy to go after Jay Inslee this much, I assure you I will do everything I can to bankrupt the Bar Association because they don't have tax dollars to fight me. And I would just honestly just plead the crap out of the case to force them into spending money. But yeah, there's no question. There's a risk to not just my license, but my safety.
Yeah.
That's why you don't see my family with me a lot.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be targets.
Yeah.
If anyone pays attention to my social media, like the Pete Serrano personal page, I'm very quiet on there until I get really pissed off. Then you see political stuff. You don't see my kids for the past 3 or 4 years. There's a risk. There's no question. But I think the greater risk is doing nothing.
I just want to make the point of that people don't realize it's not just the risk of your license and your livelihood, but they come after you and your family, and that's why there's so few people like Pete and Karen. There's so few. When you try and find somebody to advocate for a loved one in the hospital or anything that goes against what the state is doing, you can't find them. I had to call somebody in Arizona to find, it took me a while to find Klaus Schneider and then to find Karen, and it was through Moffat that we found Pete. It's really difficult because there are so few people like you and Karen that have the courage. And I think it's so important for people to understand the reason that people don't do it, and it's because, I mean, I've experienced, somebody shot a hole through our window in our office and posted death threats and put my family's information online and my wife and kids. Like, they want to shut you up, and so what Pete and Karen are doing, what Pete's doing through Moffat, it's heroic. So.
I appreciate that, Scott. And certainly, it's not for the money either, right? I quit. Now, I told you I worked for a government agency, but I was making solid money. I had a pension. I had full health benefits. I had 401k matching. I worked 410, so every Friday I was off. I assure you I wasn't driving across the state to speak at events on my weekends. So I really had this cush life. But again, I looked at that and I said, is that going to be worth anything if, assuming I'm able to freely live until I'm old? And I think that's a gross assumption that many people are miscalculating. Yeah. If we don't stand up, we're not going to grow old together. Yeah. My kids aren't going to have a future. Yeah. So that, I could leave millions of dollars on the table. But to have my kids have a freedom meant something. And then the ability to, even if I'm the crazy guy and I'm wrong, and we're not under attack like I believe we are, the ability to go to bed at night, knowing that I didn't just let it happen. I mean, I might not sleep much. When I do, I sleep sound for that reason. So, I got one right here and then one in the back.
Yeah, you mentioned the administrative stuff and agencies, not the government. Have you guys used the Administrative Procedures Act?
Yeah.
To push back on them? Or?
Yes. So the beautiful part, I'll give you a real quick snapshot of my career. Graduate law school, my first job is in this small boutique water litigation firm. Two former EPA attorneys decided they could make more money suing the EPA, right? Yeah, so this is 2010, so whatever, 12, 13 years ago. And I joined that firm, and it lasts all of like 6 months. But in that time, I learned from someone who was on the inside of how they took it on the outside to go back to the inside, if that makes sense. Literally, there was this one crazy day where I was using the Freedom of Information Act. I had a lawsuit against the EPA on the Freedom of Information Act, and we've been negotiating what documents were appropriate. Again, we're in DC, so we're like the 4th or 5th level up. Someone rings the doorbell, and I'm kind of cubbyhole back, so I got to get my way to the front door because I was the first one in the firm. And I see a trench coat walk away in a banker's box, and I knew exactly who that was. That was either my opposing counsel or somebody that was working with him, because magically the documents we had been litigating appeared on my floor that day. So having had those experiences and then having gone back to the private industry, suing the state, working in California, getting permitting for, this might shock you, but it's not easy to get oil and gas permits in California. While the resource is quite abundant, the red tape of the administrative state makes it near impossible. We permitted a 25-acre fuel terminal that had rail, road, and a marine capacity with no public comments because I had learned the process of the administrative state. Then I worked for DOE for 3 years in Energy Northwest, so now I know FOIA even better, and then I learned the Public Records Act of the state of Washington really well. So that's a very long-winded way of saying yes, we do. In fact, that Public Records Act request, I've got one for the Office of Financial Management's directive, the new one about the shop for the state workers. That's open. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request against CISA, which probably not many people know what that is. It's the cybersecurity information. Cybersecurity Information Something Administration, which is a really buried down organization, which is on November 3rd of 2020, they made a statement, a joint statement, that this was the most secure election in the history of the United States. Yeah, right? Yeah, the day after, most secure, great. Now, you know, we have to look at that because that was part of the Trump administration, but I mean, it is what it is. Whoever said it. And so I asked them, I said, I want the records that prove this. And they said, well, can you clarify it? This morning I was thinking about it in the shower and I got really pissed off. And I was like, oh, this is how I have to rewrite this. And so I'm going to be a jerk about it. And I'm going to say, okay, these are the statements you made. This is what I want to know. What evidence, let's go back to Jay Inslee's favorite two words. What are they? Science and data. There we go. My lisp isn't strong enough. I'm sorry. So I'm going to ask them for that information. So we absolutely use administrative law in our favor. We encourage people. Part of our deal is not just litigation; it's education and advocacy. If you've got an idea, hey, I want to seek records from my local mosquito board, but I don't know how to do it, or I want to go talk in front of them, or I want to go request the same records from the governor or the president of the United States, reach out. Our website, smfjb.org, just go on there, send an email. It's like there's an email us, contact us, like, hey, how do you do a Public Records Act request? Eventually, we'll get the time, I will get the time to walk away from the court, and I'd love for us to train people. Here's what the law requires. They don't define the specificity of what you have to ask, which is why in CISA I have to re-ask it, right? But we can walk through the law and help people help themselves. And then the one thing we ask on the back end, if you get great records that's cause of action, send them to us. Okay, so now I got great records, what do I do? Okay, video number 2, here you go. Send them to us. Go back to info at Silent Majority Foundation and say, I got records. Now what do I do? I got this one that says, Jay Inslee says he hates Christians. That doesn't exist that we're aware of. But let's say you find that and the whole COVID shot was to get Christians out of the state. Great. I mean, not great. I mean, it's happened. But now we've got the record to prove it, and we can actually bring him out of office to say, here, you intentionally did this. And that's what we missed in the Jay Inslee recall. We could never find the evidence, the smoking gun, that he did this with intent to discriminate. That was the unfortunate thing. So there's a lot of power in the Public Records Act. The beautiful thing too, I'm probably really tipping my hat, but since it's a friendly group, I always like to ask information through the Public Records Act. I ask information through the Public Records Act, and then I ask it through discovery in my lawsuit, because guess what? They have to give me this, and they have to give me this. And if this is here, and this is here, now I've got damages. I sue the state and say, one page, anywhere from $1 to $100 per day that you didn't give it to me. That's damages, and the judge gets the discretion of that $1 to $100 gap. But geez, if it's $1,000 and it's been 40 days, even at $1 a page, that's 40 grand. If he or she awards $10, now we're at 400, right? I mean, and then similarly, if I get this in the Public Records Act and this, now I get to sue them for sanctions. And I've seen the sanctions been awarded against the state. I've seen it. I've seen it in the stuff. I had a case, I'm working on behalf of a gym just outside of Tacoma, and the Board of Industrial Insurance Appeals, they got hit for 110 grand for not closing down during COVID. There's a lot more to the story than that, but as I researched some of the records, the states failed to give some of its required discovery. They got hit for like $15,000 in sanctions in one case. So there are judges out there, again, there are great judges out there, people in black robes that have the power and authority, and they're willing to use it and wield it appropriately. And that's all we ask. Don't wield it in my favor. Wield it appropriate. Wield it in the way that the law requires it. So that's a really long-winded way of saying, I do see your hand, but there was a hand up there first, so.
In your arguments for the proponents of masks, it's about the mask mandate, they've identified the H1n1 virus as being, if you were to measure the particle size, 1 to 1.5 micron. It's less than an aerosol. The N95, if you're clean shaven, fit tested, and fit properly, it filters down to 3 micron. So you can fit 3 viruses through depleting an N95 mask. And you see all these other masks that are being worn in the hospitals that they're mandated to wear. How do the proponents feel that that's effective if they say follow the science? It's like a ship captain saying, I'm going to put up a screen door to keep the ocean out. I mean,
Yeah,
how do they argue that?
that's a great point. And when we have brought the science-based arguments, whether it's masking or other about the effectiveness of the shot, quite frankly, it's dismissed, it's looked over. That's one where if we really want to go toe-to-toe, we're going to be paying a lot of money in experts. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars if we're going to go full-bore litigation. So we've brought it, but never as like really the leading edge of the sword. It's always been part of it, if that makes sense. And simply, I always say this, man, if I won the lottery, I'd pay off all my bills and then put the rest into my foundation so that I could. Honestly, I would just hire the crap out of the government. That's what we're doing. I mean, people like, what do? It's constitutional rights. Like, we are, think like Judicial Watch and those guys that are taking records they request from the government and then suing them on it. It's all about watching Big Brother. We know they're watching us, so our job is to be that front for the rest of us and to watch the government and do our best to catch it asleep or arrogant enough to just bulldoze our rights. And so as we bring these lawsuits, we do that. We try to bring the science, and again, we look at it and there's a lot of cost to it. I saw one more question. I also see Jen standing, so I'm guessing that's the nod. I know I've got 12 minutes till Pam comes on. I don't know if there's a segue, but we at least have time for one more question, and possibly, well, hopefully two then.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Question on that topic for trying to get science topics in front of judges. My layperson review of various cases, they don't like to argue science much. They really just try to go back onto the rights and the constitutional things in various states and local ordinances and so forth. But what kinds of cases eventually can be argued with the right experts and so forth? What kind of things can we maybe look for that the science could be decided on a court case?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the problem with the COVID science, because there is some, just not J&Z's version, is we're in such a hotly politically contested regime of law that the judges really don't want to step. I mean, I've seen it where a judge flat out dismisses the government case, but they start off with, this is not about the COVID shot or its effectiveness. Literally, it's like a CYA memo in 2 sentences, and then, by the way, the government's idiots. For 30 pages, they tell you how they're trampling the right. The judges do not, at least for the COVID stuff, right as of right now, I can speak to today. I can't predict. I'm not J&Z. I can't tell you COVID ends on Halloween. What I can tell you is this: from watching where it is, I do think when we get the cases in front of the right judges with the science. Another thing is, we went to law school. We didn't go to medical school. We didn't go to any other. Someone may have had a background in science. Most judges, it's so far over their head, they don't want to look like idiots. And when you have experts saying, that guy's a moron, even though he's got a PhD, an MD, and all these other letters behind, and he is the best researcher ever, they don't want to go with the Ryan Coles, no matter how intelligent or how right he is, right? Because he's not approved, he's on the blacklist. And so you're putting these judges in these untenable positions of the science does not support the position, but you don't understand what either one is saying, so you kind of put them in this awkward spot, and that's why I've always shied away from going super heavy-based, because the bottom line is the judge is there not to interpret science or listen to expert witnesses. I mean, he is or he isn't, but they're really there to play game with what does the law require, and that's why, again, for me, science should be supplemental. And I think that's where it should always retain its spot. I mean, I guess if we're talking about a car accident and you want to prove that someone's doing 37, there are ways to do that, tracks and stuff like that. The problem again with COVID is you have these astronomical numbers the government reports. You have the VAERS that it doesn't even look at, and then everything in between, which is really what's happening to us, right? So, Scott, you got one other question before you.
Oh, well, it's a two-part question.
Okay.
The $15,000 sanctions,
Yeah.
if they didn't fully give all the discovery, does that case then get dismissed because I couldn't defend my case properly because you didn't get all of that? That's one part. But the other part, probably, if a person is denied the ability to give ivermectin to a person that's basically on his last week or two in the hospital with this ventilator thing, and they could have saved their life, and they denied that, you know, I know some litigation has happened on that, but what is the easiest way to say, this is the case, you must allow me to give ivermectin to my relative, you cannot stop me from doing that. Oh, but you're in the ICU, okay, we'll take him out of the ICU. We can't because he's got COVID, and we can't remove him from ICU. Wait, you're holding my relative to a death sentence.
Yeah, so let's go to the first question because that's a lot easier. That particular case did actually end up getting dismissed because the judge said, "Man, you know, state, you've jerked these people around for 2 years of litigation. I'm going to sanction you $15,000 and dismiss the case because you never gave them what they were, you know, what they had to do right to, right?" And I'm not going to say every case is going to be that $15,000 sanction and dismissal, but certainly the inability to plead your case properly and to which includes receipt, you know, it's a transactional, you deliver and receive discovery. If that has failed, then fundamentally you're losing your right to plead your case properly. And so in some cases where egregious enough, yes. I mean, obviously if it's 6 days late or something of that nature, you know, here they intentionally really didn't bring it. So as far as, you know, you're asking in the remdesivir-oriented question, it's kind of 2 or 3 layers. First, there is a process, and I personally haven't successfully done it. You can seek an immediate injunctive relief to try to force the hospital. I'll tell you this, even if you got a hearing within 2 days, by the time some of these hospitals have and I didn't personally work on this, have received the mandate, okay, judge says you're ordered to allow this. And then they screw around for 2 days and the person dies day 1 3/4, okay? So that's, I'm not saying it's a risk not worth taking, right? But, you know, the problem is when you're trying to do it all in 24 hours, the ability to plead that unless you've got the form pleading and you're ready to go.
You want me to answer the other part of that?
Yeah.
So you can take them out of the hospital, right? I know people that have jailbroken their husband out of the ICU. If they don't have a high flow, which means they can deliver 40 to 60 liters of high flow at home, and they go home and the max they can do is 10, and you give them ivermectin, and they weren't treated, because this goes back to the hospital obligation to treat. They probably were septic for 7 or 8 days prior to that, so they've got a secondary bacterial pneumonia. So if you're not treating all of that, ivermectin isn't going to cure them, right? You have to be able to treat the entire system. So just asking for ivermectin is almost foolish. It's the entirety of the therapies that they were denied to get them out of acute respiratory distress, because at that point they're in the process of dying. The thing that Pete said, where it's not like science like a car crash, my argument to that is it is, right? When somebody goes in and we have those records and we can see their white blood cell count go from 8 to 12 to 16 to 22 to 31, and they're not doing anything, right, until 2 days before they die, and then they finally put them on an antibiotic. And I've seen 22 charts that look exactly like that. At a certain point, there is specific science that shows complete neglect and refuse, like an abject refusal to care, that, you know, I feel pretty strongly that we need to go to freak after these hospitals.
And so that is the separate level of that question. I know Karen had her hand raised here about,
Okay, so the problem,
Karen, you want to grab the mic?
so the problem with all of these requests for ivermectin is this. We have the right to try, but the hospital has absolute discretion whether to allow that right to try or not. It is not in the patient's hands, it is in the hospital's hands. The hospital's refused. That's the bottom line, that's the way it's written here in Washington.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that, Karen. So I mean, there are a couple things I want to close melding those two thoughts, because I think Pam, is she on, or she knows that I like to talk, so she's patient when I'm around. No, so I'll close with this. I want to meld what Scott and Karen said, because cumulatively that's one of the most important. And I'm going to meld in slightly correcting what you said. Litigation on remdesivir has not happened, it's happening. And there have been about 4 cases that I'm aware of in the nation. 2, or maybe it's 4, 5. 2 or 3 brought in Fresno, California. Another one in Central California, and I think there's one more out there in the Midwest. And those cases are really underway. What I can tell you from reading some of the pleadings, it's a standard medical malpractice, which is a little bit concerning to me. I think there should be something brought in that distinguishes when they put a tube in the wrong spot and puncture your lung, because the nurse is shaky or whatever reason that happens, didn't read the scans right, put it in the wrong spot. That's your traditional med mal. Or they leave a sponge in you, right? Here we're talking about what we fundamentally believe is nefarious government interference with healthcare. These cases have to be, in my opinion, specially pled to demonstrate the connection between hospital system, its coordinated efforts with the government, and then doctors that just aren't willing to stand up against the system. And so when you bring it against Dr. Jones and his 6 nurses and his partner, Dr. Johnson, to me, we're not going to make a change. People will get compensation, and if that's what you want, great. I don't want compensation. I want to stop the stuff. And I think that's what fundamentally your question is. How do we stop this? And that's where, Pam will probably talk about some of the things that MAFA's done. Tom Rentz has brought some information forward to specifically Senator Johnson, because apparently Wisconsin's the only place that's willing to listen. But there are a handful of senators and folks that we have to stay in touch with. And I think as we plead these things and get more information in front of the courts, we're going to put the government in a bind. And that is, in my opinion, the only way to stop this or change this. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you for your support.